Welcome everyone, back with another chess video. So for this one, I have 10 pieces of advice in how to improve at chess. And specifically, this is for beginner players, but it also applies to intermediate, advanced, really any level this can apply to, but especially useful if you're just starting out. Now, I will say a little disclaimer with this list that we have here is that with this list that I present, there's a lot of overlap with some of them, so they could be taken a bit ambiguous as far as what they apply to. And the other thing is that whenever you compile a list like this, of course there's going to be many other, possible ways that you can improve. This is by no means a comprehensive list of everything. This is just simply some of the key ideas that I think could help most players get the biggest benefit for generally least amount of time invested. Kind of the best bang for their buck, if you will. All right, so let's get started then. So the first piece of advice that we have here is tactics puzzles. And I'm sure everyone has heard this before. This is probably the number one thing that you can do to increase very quickly because patterns are so important in chess. So on chess.com, if you could just go to the puzzles thing over here and you click puzzles, this will take you to this section. Now, usually you do have to pay for these with some kind of membership, but they also have other features, such as, Puzzle Battle, which right now it is free for the rest of February this month, and Puzzle Rush, I don't know how much that's under the free account or not. It might be limited, it might not, I'm not really too sure. I think they changed it fairly recently. But what I really like, maybe even more so than these puzzles, but definitely connected, is the chess.com daily puzzle. I actually really like this. I think it's underrated. These things are so helpful, and best of all, they're free. It's only one puzzle per day, which doesn't sound like much. But what I really love about this is it's the habit of getting into this. It's the fact that every single day you can get there and solve a puzzle. And what I also like is that on Monday, it is the easiest puzzle of the week. And on Tuesday, the puzzle is slightly tougher than Mondays, and Wednesday, and you get the idea, it keeps getting tougher as the week progresses. And then, of course, Sunday puzzles are the toughest ones out there. So, Monday starts off with the really basic stuff, maybe a hanging piece or back rank, and then by Sunday, they're usually like some kind of huge endgame composition or some very, tricky idea that takes a lot of nuances several moves deep. So, it gives you a whole range, and because you cycle through, every single day, you get a little bit of each. And so that's a very useful thing because it's not only how good you are at your level, but, you don't have to wait too long because, it's just a weekend and you always come back, and you get a little taste of a below your rating or above your rating. So it's a really well-balanced thing. And perhaps even also really helpful with this is if you want to do more than one, by all means you can. They keep these daily puzzles up from who knows how far back as far as chess.com's been doing it. And so you can just use this back arrow and you can just go back to all the other ones throughout the months. And it goes back for years. And so that is unlimited. You can do as many of these as you want in a day. So that's a really useful way to get some puzzles. There's also other sites that offer free puzzles. So puzzles is definitely a number one thing that you can do. Get really good investment for your time. Okay, so then the next thing that really helps your chess are basic. These are the puzzles here. Okay, let's see. Yeah, so here, basic checkmates. Right now I have a queen and king, and this is against a king. This should be a checkmate. Very common one, but it's a very good one to know. Another one that's also common is if I take off the queen, can you checkmate with, say, 2 rooks? That is also a good checkmate to know. And if you can do that, well, what about 1 rook? You can actually checkmate with just 1 rook. And I've done videos on some of these. I'll try and post, some of these endgames and many other resources I'll talk about, maybe in the video description. So there's a lot of basic checkmates that you can research, and once you take that, you can learn. Because say you just have 1 rook, maybe you can do it, maybe you can't. But if you study it, you can do it a lot more efficiently. And those little things add up. It's a real confidence boost to know that if you get down to an endgame with just 1 rook, you can convert that to a win. So those are basic checkmates, very useful. And then very similar to this, I kind of put it as a separate category. Our third thing to look at are theoretical endgames. And these are sort of like checkmates, but these go a little bit further because the checkmate isn't immediately apparent. Right here, probably the most common example and probably the most useful is when you have a king and 1 pawn and your opponent just has a king. And usually this is going to be a win for the side with the pawn, but you have to have this studied because it involves king opposition, and it's not always so clear how you proceed. In some positions, this will be a forced draw, and if the pawn is one of the flank pawns, either on the A file or the H file, then that will also most likely be a draw. And so this is where your study comes in. It's very useful to know when these endgames are potentially win and when they're potentially a draw. So little things like that is a real confidence boost once you get down to the endgame. I just said this with the rook, but if you can do the exact same with the pawn, it's very useful to be able to convert this pawn, promote it on the other side of the board, and then win the queen checkmate that you would have just studied. Alright, so now on to the fourth thing that we have, fourth piece of advice, are chess opening principles. Very useful. I wrote a blog post on this a few years ago. I'll just scroll down here. It's quite lengthy. These are just all a bunch of resources at the end. Really useful. But generally speaking, these opening principles, I'll just go back to the chessboard here. These opening principles are usually, for the most part, the three things of control the center, which is these four squares right here. It is develop your pieces and get castled early, /king safety. So those three things, if you can do those things early in the opening, you're going to get very good results. And once again, just reiterating, I wrote an entire blog post on this. It's free to check out. More than welcome to take a look at that. Okay, so now on to our next piece of advice is analyzing games. Now, this also applies to, famous grandmasters and well-known players. These are all the classics. Chess.com has a bunch of these, as you can see, sorted by player. And to access this database, it's free. All you have to do is just go down to More here, and then you would just click Games Database right down here, and then that'll take you to this page. And then you can just click into any of these players you're interested in. You can bring up any of their games, you can study them, you can analyze them. There's so many ways that you can improve with this. But don't be limited just by really strong players. Some of the best ways that you can learn is simply analyzing your own games. And so if you were to go to your own game archive, you can do that by using the sidebar play, going down to archive. If you click that, it'll bring up all of your recent games, and then you can click those games and analyze them with the computer if you have the ability to. So that's also a very useful skill to learn from your mistakes. So that way you're not repeating the same mistakes over and over. You're actually learning from the game and finding improvements as you go. Now the next piece of advice, I don't actually have a screen for, it is YouTube videos. And there's a very good chance that you know about that because you should, know that if you're watching this very video on this channel. So thank you for stopping by and being here. But YouTube videos are very helpful. And, you don't have to be limited to my channel. There's many good chess channels out there. But the point being that you're listening to how other chess players think, you learn from them, and this is such a useful resource because as simple as it might sound, many years ago you had to open a book. There's nothing wrong with books, but they're very time-consuming compared to how many amazing resources we have online. Now you can literally connect with anyone else in the world, through platforms like chess.com. And, with YouTube, there's so many people doing videos out there, and many of them are really high quality. And so it's a great free resource that you can use to learn from your mistakes, and also learn new things that you didn't even consider. Okay, so the next thing we got up here is chess.com blogs and articles. And you can find this by the social section here. You go to blogs, and that'll bring it up. I just put up my blogs here. These are a bunch of mine that I wrote. Again, all these are free. But you can also go to many other players as well. There's a lot of players on chess.com are very well known. Some of them are even title players for the articles and such like that. So they often have some very good insight in how to improve. And chess.com blogs and articles are also completely 100% free. So it's a really valuable resource. I think a lot of people don't necessarily, know to take advantage of, but it's out there. So now you're familiar with it. And the next free resource we have is if you were to go down to More here, and then you go up to Vision. And if you click that, this will take you here. And so this is chess.com's Vision Trainer. And I use this occasionally, especially when I was starting out, for really hammering home learning the chess notation. And learning chess algebraic notation is so useful because commentators use it when they're talking about moves. Chess streamers use it when they're calculating lines. Chess books use it, when they're describing any kind of chess moves. And so, knowing the notation is a really important skill to have in chess. And if you're just starting out, it is well worth investing your time into learning these because, here you have, all these coordinates here. The A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H files, going this way. and then the 1 through 8, with the squares going up this way. These are your files. These are your ranks. So sideways are ranks here, horizontally, and vertical are files. So this is the A file, going up and down on the left side, and going all the way on the bottom here. This bottom row would be the first rank. This would be the second rank, and you get the idea with the numbers. Now with Vision Trainer, it's really helpful, especially when starting out, because all it does is you're just under a time limit. So if you hit start, it just gives you this little training thing, and you input whatever you want, and then you just go for it. So right here, I just have it set with show coordinates. I can actually hide those. Usually I don't show the coordinates when I do it, but if you're learning, it's very good to have up. And so in the training, all you literally do is you pick what color you want, which orients the board to the correct side. And then you choose either moves or coordinates in moves. And if I click moves, then it's literally just going to say any square, like say D4. And then you just have to click the D4 square really quickly. And then it might give a square like say H2, and then you click over here. And then it might say B1, and then you click over here. And it just does a bunch of these in a row, and then you get a really good practice at learning the notation. And this is just for the moves, but if you do, or for the coordinates, but if you do it with moves, it'll actually put a piece on the board. And so say there's a knight on E4 here, and then it says knight to D6. And then you'll literally just move this knight to D6, and it gives you really good practice in how to really quickly learn, how these pieces connect with the board. And you can even combine them too. You can do moves and coordinates, and then it'll give you a combination of all these. And you can do this. You can flip the board with each color, white and black, and flip sides. It's a really helpful tool to practice. I put it in a daily routine for a while, especially if you're starting out, and it'll really help you learn the chess notation well. So that's a really good, resource. It's also 100% free. Okay, so now there's those were 8 tips. So now we have our last 2, what I call the bonus tips, because they're a little bit less common, but I think they're also super helpful. So one of them, most people don't even know about, are checkmate patterns. Different than, the basic theoretical endgames, because a lot of these checkmates are so common, they are named. And one of the best resources that I have on checkmate patterns, other than like buying a book or something, is, drumroll please, very suspicious, it is Wikipedia. You wouldn't think it, so basic. But if you just go to Wikipedia and type in checkmate pattern, it has this really wonderful page here. And if you look, there's just this one diagram, and then you just look at it and like, oh, okay, here's the Anastasia's mate. It's a very simple idea. You read about it, you see it, but then you go down, and it does this for a bunch of checkmates. You can see here, it's a really quality list, and I could keep going down. I'm not going to go through all of them. You can go through this on your own time, but it's really useful, and some of these are fairly advanced. Some of these are also pretty basic, but it's good to see these, and especially if you can try and calculate them just by looking at the position. It's really useful to try and imagine, okay, if this piece was here, where would it move? And then, you kind of set up these checkmates in your mind. And it's not so important that you memorize these names. Like, this was Anastasia's mate, this was Anderson's mate, this was Arabian mate. All these are useful to learn, but it's the pattern, it's the visualization of seeing how these pieces can deliver checkmate. Just look at Arabian mate, for example. Here with the rook and the knight, this is a really interesting configuration where if you hadn't studied this checkmate, you might be surprised that, only these 2 pieces can actually deliver checkmate. If we were to only have the rook in the endgame, we would need the help of the king or some other piece to help checkmate the enemy king. The rook by itself cannot do it without help from something. And the knight by itself cannot deliver checkmate, even with the help of its own king. But the rook and knight together can actually deliver this really nice checkmate in the corner. So little things like that, and you do that for all of these checkmates. They're all really useful to learn. And so that's just a really good way to practice learning those checkmates. And the more that you see these patterns over and over, the more likely you're actually able to find them in an actual game. And then the very last piece of advice is simply listening to higher player thoughts. Some players are much higher rated, and that's a great resource. If we were to go on chess.com, there's the forums section here. And there's some really great, ways that you can just connect to the chess.com community. Forums being one of them. Of course, there's YouTube videos like this. There's really great chess books that have annotated games from grandmasters and such. And, of course, there's so many chess streamers out there and so many chess commentators out there. All of them are, very good advice for the most part. A lot of these players are very high rated. They have a lot of free insight that, is really useful. But as far as listening to higher player thoughts, higher player meaning, higher rating, basically anyone who's higher rated than you, offer up, and if they're offering up some kind of advice, just have an open ear and listen. Oftentimes you'll learn a whole lot just listening to them, and especially if it's in person where you can ask questions back and forth. That's a really useful thing to have. If you don't have them in person, then you could just go to the chess.com forums. I could just click here and hopefully it'll come up. So if you just go to, like, say, chess.com discussion, you just go through all these or whatever. You can go to any other topics. I'll just go to my topics here. You can see all of these are forums that I've created, but you can start your own. It's very simple to do. You just, new topic, you type in whatever you look for, and it's a really useful thing to be able to, in any point in time, just ask someone. And with chess.com, you're literally connecting to everyone in the world, who is on here. I mean, it's the world's largest chess site. The ability to ask a question and then within a very short frame of time, you could have a really strong player or several answer your question. That is just really huge. Back then you actually had to, like, know those grandmasters in person or know those super high players in person, or maybe find a chess club near you where those higher rated players were generous enough of their time to offer you some advice. Right now, with chess forums and everything else, it's just so helpful to be able to ask a question or even watch a chess stream and just hear some higher rated players' feedback on your game or any kind of question that you have, or even just watching them play the game and have their own thoughts on the game. It's a very useful thing to do. So those were my 10 pieces of advice. I hope they help. Of course, there's many others. There's, of course, have fun. That's a very basic one, but I'm not going to count that. You do play better when you have fun. It's good to have a sense of humor. You can't take chess too seriously, or then it kind of bogs you down and becomes work. It is still a game after all, and we should enjoy it. Another good piece of advice I did not include was just simply play a lot of games. And I didn't include that one because a lot of chess players, they, already know that, or they hear that piece of advice so often, so I don't want to reiterate those things over and over. I'll just mention it shortly here that, playing a lot is useful. But I wanted to have 10 tips that maybe aren't as common. And so there were the 10 pieces of advice. I hope that it helped everyone out. And I will see you in the next chess video.